So I want to apologize for this sermon. I'm going to be preaching about climate change, which is a challenging subject, not exactly the happy sort of thing that we might hope for. It's going to be vaguely political, and I know some of you would just as rather leave politics at the door when you come to church. And I'm not sure I really have an answer for you. As a matter of fact, I'm going to be asking you what you think we should be doing at this particular time and place in our life on this earth, so be ready. I'd also like to invoke the names of Kenji and Kobe Murka. They're my grandsons. Partly it's just gratuitous because, what's more fun than talking about your grandkids? But also I think that if we're talking about climate change, this kind of long-term thing, I know that it's helpful, and it might be helpful for all of us to be keeping in mind the generations that are coming, not just our own future, but the future of the youngest among us. And so I would invite you now just to call out the names of the children and the grandchildren that you hold in your heart as we consider this. Can you just call them out? Thank you. So I've had 3 different experiences in my life where I was just made kind of particularly aware of kind of the power of creation. One of those was the earthquake in 1989. I was in my loft space in downtown Oakland when that earthquake hit. 15 seconds, the earth below me was shaking. Even though there was very little damage where I lived, the chimney on the house next to us fell down. I was about 5 blocks from where the freeway collapsed. It's an interesting experience to think of this kind of solid earth and to feel it moving underneath you for a period of time. Another happened when I was in Hawaii. I'm a water person. I love to swim. I love to be in the ocean. But I was on a beach, and I ended up in some waves that were too big, really, for me to handle. And I'd never had that experience before. I always kind of thought, I can handle it. But I just feel how overwhelming the power of those waves were, and realizing that actually the ones I was experiencing weren't nearly as big as some that occur. The third experience was flying from one place to another, and lightning struck the plane. And nothing really bad happened out of that, but it was a surprise to see that flash, to hear that sound, and to recognize how close it was. Those experiences got me to thinking about how, the earth isn't exactly built to human scale. I mean, think about that. We think we're so important on the earth, but it's created in a way to challenge us on a regular basis. There are parts of the world that are just uninhabitable because they don't match the kind of temperature that we can tolerate. There are things that happen that are bigger than our bodies can handle. The terrain is too rough or whatever. There are just lots of ways that the earth is really at a scale that's beyond human beings. It's also true that there are a lot of places that are relatively friendly to the earth, and we have filled them up. And actually, in that process, we've actually filled them up in some places where we probably shouldn't have filled them up. The places that have catastrophic events only once in a blue moon, and so it's really hard to pay attention to that. So here we are in the Bay Area, the land of earthquakes, buying real estate as fast as we can. Or building our homes in floodplains. Or choosing to settle in places that are hot and are getting hotter. The earth is not really built to our scale. But because we are clever, and we have managed to adapt to it in ways that I don't think other species can do quite as quickly as we can. Adapt, we can find ways. Thank God for air conditioning, really. I remember being in Australia one year in January. I was teaching, of course, it's their summer, and we were at a at actually a seminary where we were teaching. And I remember going from just one building that was air-conditioned to the next building that was air-conditioned, and just feeling the intensity of the heat and realizing, oh my God, I wouldn't want to be out in this for more than a minute or two. And yet I can escape to air conditioning. Just think about that, how often we escape the power of the earth because of air conditioning. So when we look at this scripture this morning about having dominion over the earth, you could preach the sermon, and it has been preached, that actually dominion is such a problematic word. To the sense of human beings having control over all living things, that is just problematic at a basic level. And of course, the worldview of the people who were writing at the time would have been much different. What they knew about the world, what they had seen of the world, just kind of imagine that relatively small circle. That for us has gone in terms of what we're aware of. So it might have seemed at the time that there was plenty of room to expand, plenty of room to move, there were plenty of things we could do. Whereas now we realize that just because of the sheer number of us, because we are so clever, perhaps too clever by half, we have taken control, and in some ways, we have despoiled the earth, the very thing that gives us life. In all of this, the earth will be fine. The earth knows how to recover from catastrophe. But that probably won't happen in the scale of our human existence. So really what we're talking about is our ability to live on this earth, to be in relationship to the earth. Over the last few days, I've come across a couple of things on the radio. One was a podcast by Chris Hayes, MSNBC talk show host who also has a podcast called Why Is This Happening? And he was interviewing a guy named Andrew Revkin, who was a New York Times writer who's been writing on climate change for 30 years. He now works with National Geographic. And they were having a conversation about some of the challenges. Why is it that climate change is so challenging for us to deal with? And they named 4 things. The first is that greenhouse gases are invisible. We can't see them. Even smog makes it easier for us to deal with that particular problem because we can see the smog, but we can't see the greenhouse gases. It's invisible. The second is that it requires collective action. So that means it's not good enough even for people in the Bay Area to deal with this issue, or people in California or the United States. It's like the whole world needs to deal with it. I mean, talk about political challenge. So it requires collective action. The third is that this is playing out over a long time span. And it's really hard to keep our attention for a long time span, especially in this day and age where people have discovered how quickly we can be distracted by the next bright, shiny thing. So how is it possible for us to pay attention for a long enough period of time that we can address this issue? And finally, there are powerful and rich interests who would just as rather not deal with this because it's not to their economic advantage. So those 4 things, it's invisible, collective action, long time span, and these powerful, rich interests. All of those things conspire to make it a challenge to deal with climate change. And yet, as I look around the political landscape right now, I want to say, this is the most important thing we should be talking about. This is the most important thing we should be thinking about. This is the thing that we should be standing up in the street and yelling about. And yet, there are those challenges to doing that. And I look at the political landscape, and you can hardly see it being talked about. As a matter of fact, it feels like we're going backwards in terms of the actions that the United States is taking to deal with climate change. Here is this issue that is so challenging, and yet we seem to be moving backwards. How can we do this? And so I can just feel the built-up frustration in my own body around this. Even as the other bright, shiny political objects are grabbing my attention in ways that want to pull me right away from it. So this is the question. This is the question I want to ask you. What should we be doing at this particular moment in our life, in the United States, in the world? What is it that we should be doing? And I actually want you to answer that question. And just to make it a little bit more challenge, I want you to do it in just a sentence. One sentence. You can have one semicolon. That's all. So I'm wondering if there are a couple of people who might run the microphones. Lorenzo, could you be a microphone runner? You can also have your sentence, too. Someone else want to be a runner? Yeah. Or do you want to have your sentence? You can have your sentence and run, too. OK, why don't you go first? In a sentence.
I've got the microphone. I'm a geographer. We need to find places that are temperate so we can house all the people who can't live where they are anymore. We need to get ready for those people in the Sahel because they got no place to live. That's mine. Okay, who's next? Yeah, Phil. Stand. Here we go.
Voting.
Voting, that was short. Nice. Okay.
Teach our children to live the way our grandparents used to live and with a better view of their impact on the earth.
We need to lay the groundwork to phase out capitalism in the next couple of generations.
That's Sue over here.
We need to nominate and elect political candidates who are not in denial of climate change.
Begin at home to follow practices that will lead to the slowing of climate change.
Give women control over their own bodies and provide safe and free contraception for everyone who wants it.
Deal with racism and poverty and war and violence, because until people feel safe and cared for and loved and their basic needs taken care of, then they can't care about climate change.
Back here.
Forfeit our freedom like they do in the Galapagos in Ecuador, where the people are not able to turn over the environmental regulations.
We need to take political power away from those rich special interests of climate deniers by forbidding them from paying for political campaigns.
We need to drastically reduce military spending, which is responsible for a huge amount of the emissions.
Make science great again.
Build a solar-aware new Pilgrim Hall.
Pay our teachers more.
Yes.
We need to maintain our forests and rivers and local environments so that we can pass them down to our future generations and give them the same concepts.
Rejoin the Paris Accord.
Add civics to our STEM curriculum so people understand how to affect their government.
We need sustainable and humane agriculture that doesn't alienate us from our food.
Think about the environmental implications of other areas that we're working in. So always have that lens in the other pursuits we're doing. So whether it's affordable housing or health or education or just run the gamut, but always have that as the lens.
Use our consumer power to make choices that support environmental causes and sustainability always.
When you go out the door, think, can I walk? Can I take the bus? Can I ride a bicycle? Before you get in the car.
One more, maybe down here, or two, couple. Actually, one more.
Eat less beef in particular, but meat in general.
Invest in green companies and check our mutual funds to encourage them to invest in green as well.
Thank you. I'll take the microphones too, thanks. Oh, I just had the sense that it might be better than for you to hear from me what I thought, for us to do that together, and I appreciate the breadth and the depth of that wisdom. I'd like to suggest to you that as progressive Christians, that we might have some particular characteristics that could be really helpful in this process. So earlier on, I named these 4 kind of challenges to dealing with this subject. The first one is that it's invisible. We give glory to the indivisible all the time. Did I say indivisible? Invisible, you know what I meant. Second, collective action. We work as community, we understand what it means. And because we're interested in the wide circle, I think it makes us even more open to the possibility of collaboration and cooperation. And because we think of ourselves as global citizens, our connections, our commitments don't just end at our borders. It makes us ready to be working with other countries, to let go of the identities or the needs that we might feel that we have as a country, and to consider that broader picture. Long time span. So, first of all, our tradition is a long time span. That we understand the power of looking not just at the moment, but to look at the big picture, extending back into the past and also forward into the future at the same time. We know how to do that. And finally, dealing with powerful and rich interests. Jesus taught us about that over and over again. I mean, even when we are the powerful and the rich interests. As I listened to this podcast with Chris and Andrew, an interesting thing happened close to the end. It was like the understanding the magnitude of the challenge and also looking at the breadth of responses that they felt were needed, not just political, but also looking at it from the social science point of view, looking at it from the point of view of where are people choosing to live and how do we decrease the harm that is caused by people living in areas that are affected by these major events. They moved into a more kind of almost mystical part of this, and you could tell that Chris was kind of struggling with this, because I don't think that he's a person of faith necessarily. I don't know exactly, but from what he said, kind of describing that the existential nature of this challenge. In some ways, it's like facing the possibility of death. That's not a happy thought, but we know the power of that. We know the power of that. And so the whole recording kind of dropped into this deeper place. And Andrew Revkin told this story about being at a conference. It was actually, I think it was at the Vatican, where climate issues were being considered. And he was sitting next to a man named Walter Monk. Interesting. Walter is an oceanographer, and he's like 96 or something like that. So he's had a long time span. And Andrew asked him what he thought it would require to solve this problem, and this is what he said. It will take a miracle of love and unselfishness. It will take it will take a miracle of love and unselfishness. Amen.